The audience, hello, welcome, good evening, dear entrepreneurs, dear startups, dear founders. Welcome at this October edition of Startup Grind. We have several interesting items for you where you can learn from interesting founders and people who are helping founders and entrepreneurs. Now, without any further ado, please let me bring on stage Peter Savic, the co-director of Startup Grind, who will introduce the panelists to you. Peter?
Hey, good evening. Thank you so much, Marian, for your kind intro. My name is Peter, co-director of Startup Grind London, and this October we're supporting Black Leaders Month globally in all our 650 chapters. And it gives me a great pleasure to have a panel this evening with some amazing Black leaders and also some good friends. So yeah, without any further ado, I would like to bring to the stage Cliff Fluet, who is a partner at Silkin. He's also a mentor, advisor to many companies that are disrupting digital media using high tech. He's a founder that built his own legal practice and also an advisory firm in parallel. So it gives me a great pleasure to have Cliff here on the stage tonight.
Good evening, Peter.
Hello, Cliff. Yeah, and also we have Gary Stewart, who is a founder and CEO of Nest Founders, and he's ex-CEO of Fira by Telefonica. Gary, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure always to have you on our event. You've been around for quite a few times with us on the Startup Grind stage, and it's always great to have you. And we also have Kenneth. Siber, who is WeWork Labs head of UK and Ireland, and then Kenneth is also ex-founder, as I may say. He built a company and exited to Fujitsu, and it's really fantastic to have you all on board. So because we only have a half an hour to discuss the topic of tonight, which is learning for founders, let's just get straight into it, and potentially you can say something about yourself. Cliff, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity, Peter. So as mentioned by you, I mean, my role in the world of digital media for the last 25 years has been working with disruptive companies. For years, I worked in industries, and now I'm a partner at a law firm, Silkin, where virtually all of my clients are in the world of digital media. And I also run an advisory firm which focuses on disruptors working with incumbents and insurgents. And I'm particularly interested in working with founders and boards in order to crack the most difficult challenges.
Amazing, thank you. Gary, would you like to say more about you and the Nest?
Yeah, no, so the Nest kind of really addresses the problem of overlooked founders, the idea being that, you know, the vast majority of founders out there will never get funded or really kind of even looked at by investors. And people kind of think that that's cool. And I guess what we're saying is you can use technology to actually empower entrepreneurs, not just to learn how the game is played, but then to be put in touch with the right people as well, whether those be mentors, coaches, other entrepreneurs, or investors.
Amazing. And finally, Kenneth, would you like to tell us more about your work and what do you do at WeWork Labs?
Well, that'll be a very long story, but yeah, I think as you know, as you said, we're here at WeWork, you know, and working on supporting founders in the innovation ecosystem across the UK and Ireland. I think WeWork, hopefully, at least to this audience, doesn't need much of an introduction. And yeah, prior to WeWork, as you mentioned, I started my own companies and invested in some and build a few other accelerators. And yeah, that's what's going on right now.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. So let me ask you a first question, and it's to do with, do you believe that there are natural entrepreneurs that were just born with it, or this might be a skill that we can develop and learn? Anyone wants to go first? Cliff.
I'll take that one, Peter. So I think that there are definitely some common traits with successful entrepreneurs. There's a resilience, there's a natural curiosity, there's a questioning of the status quo. The best entrepreneurs do as much listening as they do talking. I meet lots of entrepreneurs that do a lot of talking and not a lot of listening. but also as well, they're the ones who understand the importance of maintaining and building on a network, that the best entrepreneurs are the ones who work in parallel and in concert rather than on their own. Now, it's almost like a band. Everyone looks at the front man, but actually it's the people who've got the tightest band, the best support structures and the networks. And that's been, I think, one of the challenges that entrepreneurs have, which is access. One of the themes that are being looked at by Startup Grind and Black History Month is how do you build that network when you aren't born into it, or you didn't go to the right schools, or you've come as an immigrant, or you've come as someone who's a refugee. How you build those, how you tap into those. They are systems that can be hacked. And I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. I mean just accessed, really. And I think enhanced access and platforms is a huge part of the problem, and actually what we can look to solve using technology as well. So with platforms like the Nest have a huge role to play, I think.
Well, thanks for the shout out. I mean, I think what I was going to say is I think sometimes when we ask that question, it's really kind of like a bias for people in the West, right? Because in certain countries, and even in this country, some people don't have a choice but to try and figure out if they can set up a business because the other systems are kind of like closed to them. And so I think that's one thing I would say. And I would say that the second thing is that, like, yeah, I do think that some entrepreneurs are born in the sense that they have like a certain risk profile and a certain willingness to be disruptive. But I don't think that's, in law, you would say it's necessary but not sufficient. So it's kind of like you do need to have a willingness to take a risk and to just really just think differently about the way the world operates. But that's just kind of like the beginning. Then it takes like about 10 to 15 years of just grind and dedication. And I think that there are a lot of people who may not have the initial risk appetite, but they do have this other portion, which is kind of like the ability to work really hard at something. And at the end of the day, I almost think that that's kind of more important, because you can find someone to partner with who's going to be that risk taker, but that risk taker is only useful in the company for a certain amount of time. After a while, it's just a company.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, Gary, and I think it's the same question as whether they are born athletes or born anything else, right? It's no much more there are some people who are such talented entrepreneurs that they can be lazy, and then there are such lazy entrepreneurs that are so super talented, they don't have to do much. And then there are people who work so hard who may not be the most talented entrepreneurs, but just have this sort of the drive, the dedication, the willingness to work all hours, and they overcome the fact that they may not be as naturally talented as I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg or whoever we might point to. But I also think, as Gary said, right, there's a difference between being an entrepreneur or starting a company and being a successful entrepreneur, right? There are people who are born, I think there are people who are born unable to work for other people. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs I know, and perhaps I was like that as well, used to be like that, unable to work for other people, therefore with no other option if you actually want to pay the bills than to start a company. Then actually being successful and good at doing it is a different kettle of fish.
Amazing. I just want to follow on what Cliff mentioned, and this is resilience. So how has resilience and some other skills you gain through entrepreneurship help you elsewhere in life, especially nowadays when we live in a crisis?
Well, I think resilience really is. I think if you could teach your kids, and I've got a couple, if you could teach your kids one thing, right? For me, actually, the whole point of going to school is learning, resilience and I guess a degree of social interaction. A lot of the actual topics, I don't know, I may kind of reveal something I shouldn't, right? But I think, I've certainly forgotten, more than I can remember, and I think that goes for most of us. But I think learning to fail, right, and kind of being in a safe environment where failing is okay. I think that's kind of, for me, the point of the best education and the best schools, right? And that sort of resilience, I think is invaluable.
Yeah. I'd also add to that, as well as resilience, a certain laterality. So one of the things is that the best entrepreneurs don't accept the status quo. They understand it. They don't want to disrupt something without understanding it first and then thinking laterally. I think that laterality plus resilience occupies an opportunity for people to be able to become inventive. That's where businesses are born. That's when new business models are born. That's when people can spot an opportunity, and rather than look at from the position of incumbency and see something as a disruption, see it genuinely as an opportunity. So that opportunity to basically growth hack and be able to tap into these new worlds very much come from having the opportunity and the willingness to fail. Kenneth's completely right. You know, one of the things that disturbs me a little bit about learning modules these days is kids being told that there is an answer, rather than actually seeing them as being people that need to be able to find a solution. So I think that those elements I think are utterly important. And resilience is essentially the opportunity to take failure as a learning rather than as some life judgment. And I've seen some people never get over that, and other people realize this was just version 1.0. I'll move on.
No, very well said. Thank you for sharing that. And while we are on this situation, how, especially you, Kenneth, how has this current situation impacted your sector when you're talking about the co-working and a kind of physical location ones? And, you know, sense of that, how do you see that future of work, you know, moving forwards?
We haven't really noticed any change, Petar. Pretty much business as normal over here. I don't know what you're talking about. No, it's as you can imagine, it's been madness. And I think you know, if you look at well, there's two things, right? There's the future of office and how people work, and then there's the future of co-working specifically. And I'm not necessarily going to make myself an expert on the future of work. You know, I think some of the stuff we've seen coming in from our clients, right, is that some of the kind of big high rise, the sort of way of working where we'd all go into one large space and all be together in one space, every day, Monday to Friday, that's probably gone for a while. And what people are coming, at least to WeWork, for is flexibility. Flexibility both in terms of where people can work and when they can work and how they can work. So a lot of, at least our enterprise clients, are using much more collaboration spaces, sort of seeing London and our spaces as large campuses from where, as letting their employees find a place of work. Because I think a lot of people are also kind of coming to terms with the fact that the home working experiment does become less fun after the kind of initial couple of months goes out of it, and we're sitting in our kitchens and someone is assembling flat pack furniture upstairs and the kids are shouting and the Amazon doorbell man is ringing. I think people need a space to work, right? But they don't want to commute as far. They don't want to be all in big spaces. I think flexibility it will become really interesting, right? And I think that also kind of brings it around some challenges for the next generation of working, right? Because we are all leveraging our social connections from having worked for a while, those of us who've got a bit of gray hair. I think, the next generation is going to have to find a different way of building trust and connections if they are not together in the office every day. And how that looks, I'm not sure anyone really knows yet.
Well, thank you for sharing. What do you think, Cliff? How is this situation impacting your business? I presume you have more business than usual because everyone needs kind of legal services in these days.
Well, provided they use the right law firm, Peter, then yeah. No. My own practice, I pivoted to digital anyway. One of the things that I hadn't really quite understood was just how much incumbency and a sort of almost kind of industries and sectors that my clients were looking to disrupt were sort of happy to cruise along. And then along comes a significant sort of black swan event like COVID. And I would absolutely aver we've seen 5 years innovation in 5 months. There are companies who are getting investment, companies who are getting proof of concepts out there, because every single company is having to rethink its model. And then from the other shape of the lens, as part, I'm on the board at Silkin and essentially the chief innovation officer. The opportunity for quite a small C conservative sector like legal services, having to rethink how people work, what the environment is, how they collaborate, what the tools are. And that has been a massive boost to internal innovation as well. So internally and externally, and with the clients that we're looking to do, and people looking to embrace things that were very, very scary, like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, edge computing, the adoption of 5G in order to allow collaboration, all of these tools being, and understanding how much we're all being held back by the latency of our existing networks is creating a huge impetus for disruption.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have a question for you, Gary, and it is about how did you bring your team together, and then how how did you manage to build such a diverse team in a way that, you know, you just recently launched the new app and you kind of move from that big corporate role running via accelerator. So could you tell me more about your kind of team building and how you managed to build such a diverse team?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely been some lessons along the way. I think that like when you run a team at a corporate, like you can be a little bit more lax. I think by the time I left Wire, we were like about like 20 or 30 people or something. So you can be a bit more lax. You know, people have like a kind of it's not really on them. It's kind of like if there are mistakes being made, well, you know, ha ha ha, we have like a big budget, we're cool. I think that when you're at a startup, it's a really different thing. I found that I've become a lot more brutal at a startup, meaning that like people are either there to help you or they're there to hurt you. And unfortunately, that's kind of the way it is. It's like someone's either kind of helping you to extend your runway or they're eating up your runway. And so I think that for me, that's kind of the number one lesson I've learned, which is that I kind of need people, regardless of skin color or anything else, who are just really entrepreneurial and adding value all the time. I guess it's what Reed Hastings called the keeper test. You know, he said he couldn't have built Netflix if he didn't have people who he could just trust to get on with it without kind of being micromanaged. And so that's what I'm really looking for. At the same time, I'm always still trying to make sure that I'm kind of looking into deeper pools of talent. So I'm not only looking into the people in the networks that I already have, I'm also looking to kind of use other networks. So before I was on this call, there's a network called the McKinsey Black Network, where they kind of bring together kind of like executives from different corporates. And I was on that last year. So essentially now when I kind of need to kind of make sure I'm being diverse, I would send out the job description, not just on LinkedIn, but also to different networks. If I want a woman founder or a woman partner, I'm also going to do the same thing. So I kind of just make sure that I'm holding myself accountable to the very highest standards, because if not, that's actually going to kill my business. But at the same time, I'm not just limiting it to the pools of people that I know. I'm always kind of making a very conscious effort to play in new pools of people and talent.
Yeah, it's really, really good points. Thank you for sharing that. And when we're talking about the mentors, advisors, and networks of people, you mentioned some of the interesting mentors. What do you think? How important and are those strong connections? You obviously, all of you have a very good connections, and especially in WeWork Labs, I believe you have fantastic connections to mentors and investors. How important is to have those, and especially when it comes to mentoring?
Well, I think I actually didn't have an awful lot of mentors when I started my first businesses, but I wish I did. And I guess one of the reasons for doing stuff around accelerators and sort of the WeWork Labs and the stuff we do is that I can see how valuable it would have been. To be honest, when I started my business, and it's longer ago, it didn't even cross my mind that actually, you could get a mentor, or that there were things like, there weren't really that many accelerators. I think Techstars had just about gotten started, but there wasn't that ecosystem of support that you can find today. And so every single mistake I made, and trust me, I made many, and I even made some of the same mistakes twice, which you're not supposed to do. And some of them were very costly. I think, if you have a good mentor or a good sort of ecosystem around you, you can just accelerate your business much faster, and you can avoid, some of the stupid mistakes, right? Some of the stupid mistakes around first, as Gary was talking, hiring the first people, about finding the first couple of hires, which is so crucial. It kills you or boosts you forward, right? There are some actually things that mentors who've done it before will have known and experienced, and can help you with how do you raise money, how do you structure your cap tables, all these things. I think finding good mentors is absolutely worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, and I would say
that's really good to know. Yeah, please continue, Gary.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, sorry to interrupt. Beyond the mentors, it's like me now as a founder, the most important thing is money. You know what I mean? Like I love advice, but I love money even more. Because the thing is that, like, at the end of the day, I think it's something like 82% of startups will die because of a lack of cash flow. So that really is the gasoline that keeps the whole thing running. And there's no worse feeling than worrying how you're going to get to the end of the month when you have a business. That's your number one preoccupation. So I think that the difficulty is that, like, the vast majority of founders won't get funded. And those founders that will get funded probably had a warm intro or a relationship with the person that's going to fund them. I think the research in Silicon Valley says even stuff like if male investors that have a daughter are more likely to invest in women. So it is kind of like all of this like touchy-feely stuff.
Interesting.
Not, you kind of are thinking, oh my God, it's a total level playing field. It isn't really a level playing field. It's who you know. Venture capital was basically begun by people, groups of friends who had worked together, kind of like pooling their capital and then investing in other people. And I think to this day, it still kind of remains that way, which is essentially these closed networks of people who kind of are like each other and like each other and support each other and people like them. And for you to break into that, if you don't come from those networks, I think is really difficult. So it requires a very conscious and constant effort to try and expand your networks in order to make sure that you even have a chance of funding. If not, you're going to keep hearing the answer, oh, well, you're too early or we don't know. And you're going to be like, how'd that company over there get funded, though? I mean, they seem to be even earlier than I am. Well, it's because they probably knew someone or they knew someone who knew someone and that person was willing to vouch for them. And so they got the money and you're still just working hard.
Yeah,
that's really important to say. And you, Cliff, you also, I mean, I know you mentor at many places, including Abbey Road's Studio Incubator. And then tell us more about your experience of mentoring and connecting it to investors further.
I completely agree with everything that Kenneth and Gary said, just to be clear. So let me just add a different lens on it. I think that given it's Black History Month, which is one of the themes of this chat today, is actually the importance of people who look like you or understand where you came from. So I was born of extremely modest means, and I'm euphemizing wildly there. I came from the wrong part of London. I didn't have any obvious benefits at all. So working with female founders, working with people from diverse backgrounds, people being able to empathize and relate with you, which is essentially what networking is, you know, and that of course is what ultimately leads to what Gary's talking about, which is about the money. But actually the opportunity to mentor people who can give you a form of leadership, can give you support and empathy. And as a mentor, I see it totally as a two-way deal. I learn at least as much from those that I mentor and vice versa. So for me, I think it's an extraordinarily important part of the digital media ecosystem and entrepreneurism. And actually, it's what opens up the money, it's what allows the collaboration, and it's what helps businesses grow.
Yeah, very well said. And you mentioned money, Gary mentioned investors. So how difficult is to find investors these days? And you know, what would be the best way of fundraising in this momentum? Kenneth, I know WeWork organizes demo days usually. What was the situation now? How do you see any traction there?
I think Gary might be the more recent expert in this, because he's actually been out there fundraising recently. You know, whilst I'm sitting comfortably on the sideline watching the show. I sense, from what I'm seeing, right, I think the challenge is the money is all out there, right? The money is still all out there, right? And there's huge amounts of dry powder. And if you listen to a lot of the investors, they say they're still investing. I think that is probably largely, I was going to find a word you can use on Zoom and not be edited out, but I'm not sure it's entirely true. That they still are, for lack of a more direct way of saying it. I do, think that if you are, I think the challenge I think we're seeing, right, is that if you have a very early stage idea, you can actually get funded. I think that's where the money is going, right? So the things that, people are kind of looking, well, the world is going to stand still for a year and a half. So let's invest in really innovative stuff that perhaps is unproven. I think that's where you can get some money. Unfortunately, probably as Gary says, can get that money more easily if you are already part of the establishment. It's still going to be hard if you're not. The growth funding, I think, is hard right now because there isn't any growth anywhere, really, apart from a few sectors, right? So a lot of the VCs who would have previously invested in something that had decent growth metrics are probably holding off on that a bit to kind of see where their own portfolios go. So yeah, I think it's a really tough climate out there, but I think Gary might have a even more recent perspective.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Ken. It's like, so this morning I was on another call. I'm on the board of One Tech, and we were talking about this. And I think that what John Spindler said, and I haven't independently verified it, is that right now the market is really difficult for, like the angels have basically kind of like disappeared. They're all kind of really nervous, holding on to their cash, trying to keep their jobs. It might change somewhat as we kind of get to the end of the tax year, and they might see some benefit in like EIS and SEIS. A lot of the VCs have kind of retrenched as well. So there's a lot of money that's being invested in Series A and Series B, but there's not as much money being spent on early stage or pre-revenue companies. So that's the big challenge right now, which is that like the VCs are basically saying, okay, well, it's a moment of like triage, or at least not all of them. I mean, a certain percentage of them, or the majority, I would say, are basically saying, let's retrench. Let me kind of double down on the companies that I think are my winners, right? And then the companies that are their losers, maybe they're not really focusing on that much, or they're cutting, or whatever the case may be. And then beyond that, you have people just not really that willing to take a risk on early stage investments, particularly if, the angels are basically, because what I'm finding right now is you're trying to talk to the angels. And first of all, it's always been really difficult to identify angels. They're completely kind of like disaggregated. So how do you find an angel? How do you know if someone actually really has money, or if they're just calling themselves an angel because they like to pretend that they're rich? So you had to do that. In the old world, you could do this in a face-to-face meeting. Now you're trying to do it via Zoom calls or online lists and stuff like that. So I think the big challenge right now is for early stage founders, pre-revenue founders, finding people who still have a risk appetite and the money to be able to invest.
Yeah. I'd agree with all of that. In many ways, some people drew comparisons at the early days of lockdown with 2008. 2008 was very, very different. You know, it's where the money literally seized up in the system. And actually is one of the reasons why things like EIS and SEIS, because the individuals had cash and the institutions didn't. We've got an inversion of that to a certain extent. And really, Series A, Series B are happening, but they're being super picky. And what they're looking for is betting on the future. You're getting post-pandemic bets. So a lot of reg tech, a lot of digital tech, a lot of AI, a lot of what's the new world of retail, what's the new world of engagement, what's the new world of Internet of Things and devices as people look past the pandemic. So, you know, it's going to be very, very difficult in certain sectors. And in other sectors, you'll probably found that your investment cycle speeded up by a few months.
Amazing. Yeah, well, these are all been really, really good points, and thank you for sharing on it. It's really a pleasure to have you here. I'm just being conscious of the time. We have another Fireside Chat coming up. So lastly, do you have any kind of resources and things you want to share with our Startup Grind London community, or potentially some places where people can reach out to you if they want to learn more? Kenneth?
Yeah. Just add me on.
Okay.
It's just GARYSTEW, and always happy to chat and always happy to help other founders.
Same here. Find me on LinkedIn, and I'll do what I can.
Same with me. LinkedIn is a great way. We can immediately find out who we have in common virtually all the time. It's how you build your network, guys. See who you've got in common and then leverage it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us and for being with us tonight. I wish you all the best, and please stick around. We're gonna be doing a virtual networking later on, so this is a opportunity for everyone to kind of get along later on. Enjoy.